Marcus Reed had always lived a life that seemed to blend into the background. At 37, he was the kind of guy who could go unnoticed in a crowd, not because he was forgettable, but because he made no effort to stand out. Working as a security guard at the Southbridge Mall, Marcus had learned to live in the margins, his life a series of quiet nights and early mornings, always alone, always with little more than his thoughts to keep him company. His job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even particularly thrilling. He spent most of his evenings walking the empty halls of the mall, making sure the doors were locked and the surveillance cameras were working. Occasionally, he'd greet the late-night janitors, or the few night shift employees who had taken refuge in the quiet corners of the shopping center. But aside from that, Marcus's nights were just that quiet. The mall was nearly empty, and after midnight it was like stepping into another world, one where the only sound was the hum of the lights overhead. Marcus was good at his job, diligent, precise, dependable, but there was nothing about him that screamed excitement. The hours spent in solitude gave him plenty of time to reflect, and more often than not, he found himself thinking about his life. He had never married, never had children. He wasn't one for big social gatherings, and he kept his relationships to a small, select group. His friends, if they could be called that, were few and far between, most of them remnants of a life he had left behind. His family was even further removed, scattered across the country with little connection or communication. Living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, Marcus kept to himself, content with the simplicity of his routine. Every day blended into the next, and that was just the way he liked it. He wasn't a man of big dreams, and he had long since stopped expecting his life to take any wild turns. The idea of adventure or excitement was foreign to him. Comfort, predictability, and the humdrum of daily existence suited him just fine. But deep down, there was a part of Marcus that wondered if life had more to offer. It was something he rarely let himself think about, mostly because it felt like a pipe dream. He had let the years pass by without much thought, clinging to the small joys that came with his routine, a good cup of coffee before his shift, the satisfaction of checking another task off his list, the rare moments when a customer acknowledged his presence with a brief nod. These were his little pieces of happiness, and yet, in the back of his mind, Marcus knew he was capable of more. He just didn't know how to make it happen. He had made peace with the fact that he wasn't a hero, not someone who would ever be remembered for doing something extraordinary. His life, like his job, was steady, reliable, and quiet. That was until the night everything changed. It was a crisp Thursday night when Marcus Reed's routine was interrupted by a figure emerging from the shadows. The mall had long since emptied out, and the only sound was the soft click of his boots echoing against the tile floor. His shift had been uneventful as usual. He was preparing to make his final rounds before heading to the security office when a faint sound caught his attention. Footsteps. At first, Marcus thought it might be one of the few late-night employees still lingering, perhaps taking a break or wrapping up work. But as he turned the corner near the food court, he saw someone he didn't expect, a teenager, no older than 16 or 17, looking disoriented and out of place. The kid's clothes were disheveled, and he was walking at a hurried pace, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, as if afraid of something or someone following him. "Hey, you lost or something?" Marcus called out, his voice steady but laced with curiosity. It wasn't uncommon for kids to wander into the mall late at night, especially those with nothing better to do, but something about this kid didn't seem right. His eyes were wide, his expression anxious. The teenager froze, then looked up his face, a mix of surprise and apprehension. I'm not lost," the boy's stammered voice, barely above a whisper. Just trying to get home." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It's past midnight. You sure you're all right?" The teenager shifted his weight uneasily, glancing around nervously. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to get back home." Something about the boy's demeanor felt off. Marcus could see the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were hunched, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, as though he were hiding something. It didn't sit well with Marcus, but he wasn't about to pry too much. After all, it wasn't unusual for young people to act a bit out of place at that hour. The mall was almost always quiet, and for someone like Marcus whose job was to observe and protect, it was easy to spot when something didn't add up. "Where do you live?" Marcus asked, his tone more concerned now. "You need me to call your parents or something?" The kid shifted again, taking a cautious step back. No need for that. I just need a ride. My mom, she's not home. I can't get a hold of her. I don't have any money for a cab or anything." Marcus noticed the kid's phone in his hand, screen cracked, and the faint glow lighting up his face as he tried again futilely to call someone. It was clear he was desperate, and Marcus could feel a tug of sympathy. Something about the teenager's words didn't ring true, but the fact that he had no money, no way of getting home, and seemed genuinely frightened made Marcus pause. After a long moment, Marcus sighed. "Look, kid, I'm not supposed to be out here giving rides, but it's clear you're in a bit of a bind. I'll take you home. Where do you live?" The teenager hesitated, then gave him an address in a part of town Marcus didn't recognize. It sounded a little far, but Marcus was willing to take the chance. He gestured for the boy to follow him. "Thanks, I really appreciate it," the teenager said quietly, still glancing over his shoulder as they walked toward the exit. Marcus didn't say much as they walked to his car. He didn't have to. He could see the relief in the boy's eyes, and it made him feel good to know he was doing something helpful. The drive through the nearly empty streets was uneventful, and the teenager didn't speak much more, only muttering thanks when Marcus pulled up in front of an old apartment complex. "Here we are," Marcus said, stopping the car. The teenager hesitated for a moment before unbuckling his seatbelt. "Thanks again," the boy said softly, his voice cracking slightly. He quickly opened the door, glanced back at Marcus one last time, and disappeared into the darkened building. Marcus sat there for a moment, watching the boy disappear into the night. Something about the whole encounter felt strange, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The kid had seemed grateful, but there had been an unease in his eyes that lingered long after he was gone. It wasn't the first time Marcus had helped someone out of a tight spot, but this one felt different. It felt like there was more to the story than he had been told, though Marcus couldn't be sure. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, Marcus started the car and drove back to the mall. Little did he know the events of this night would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. As Marcus drove, the streets outside seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark expanse of the city. The headlights of his car cut through the emptiness, illuminating the occasional street sign or tree as they passed. The boy who had introduced himself as Jake sat in the passenger seat, his hands tightly clasped together in his lap. Marcus noticed that Jake hadn't said a word since they'd left the parking lot, and the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. The only sound was the hum of the car's engine and the occasional click of the turn signal as Marcus navigated through the quiet streets. It was late, well past midnight, and the city felt like a different place at that hour. The usual bustle of traffic and chatter was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that hung in the air. Every once in a while, Marcus would glance over at Jake, but the teenager's gaze was fixed out the window, his face shadowed by the dim light of the dashboard. It wasn't until they were about 10 minutes into the drive that Marcus noticed how tense Jake seemed. The boy hadn't relaxed at all. His body was stiff, his shoulders hunched as though he were trying to shrink into the seat. He kept glancing over his shoulder, not in a casual way, but with a sense of urgency as though he were waiting for something or someone to appear behind them. Marcus felt a flicker of unease. It wasn't the first time he had driven a stranger home late at night, but something about this situation felt different. It was more than just the kid's nervousness. There was a strange energy in the air, a sense of something not quite right. The atmosphere inside the car felt heavier with each passing minute. "You okay?" Marcus asked, trying to break the silence. "You've been awfully quiet." Jake's eyes darted toward him, but only for a second. He nodded quickly, but his lips were pressed together in a tight line. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." Long night, Marcus pressed, glancing at the road ahead as he made a turn. Jake didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared out the window again, his fingers twitching nervously on his lap. The silence stretched between them like an invisible barrier. Marcus frowned, feeling that something more was going on beneath the surface. He didn't want to pry, but the kid was acting like he was carrying a heavy weight, something he didn't want to talk about. The city streets were starting to thin out as they approached the outer parts of town, and the more suburban areas where the houses began to look older, more worn. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over him. It was just a kid, he reminded himself, a teenager trying to get home. He had seen plenty of strange situations in his time on the job, but this one had a peculiar air about it. Jake shifted in his seat again, his eyes still flickering to the rearview mirror every so often. The boy's discomfort was palpable. "Hey, you want me to turn on the radio or something?" Marcus asked, trying to ease the tension. "Maybe get your mind off whatever it is that's bothering you." Jake shook his head quickly. "No, that's okay." His voice was tight and he looked out the window again, almost as though he was searching for something. Marcus watched him for a moment, wondering what could be making the kid act so jumpy. He had only known Jake for a short time, but the teenager's body language spoke volumes. There was something that was unsettling about him, something that went beyond just being tired or stressed. A sudden noise, the screech of tires in the distance, broke the stillness, followed by the distant sound of sirens. Marcus instinctively glanced in his rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind him, no one following them, no flashing lights. Still, the sound made his skin prickle and he could see Jake flinch in his seat. "Everything all right back there?" Marcus asked, his tone more cautious now. Jake didn't answer. He just stared out the window, his eyes wide. For a moment, the two of them sat in silence again, the only noise the low hum of the car's engine. Marcus turned his attention back to the road, but a nagging thought lingered at the back of his mind. There was something deeply off about the way Jake was acting. He wasn't just a teenager who had missed his bus or stayed out too late. No, Marcus could feel it. Something was wrong. As they approached Jake's address, Marcus found himself wondering whether this was just a simple case of helping a lost kid, or if there was something more hidden beneath the surface. Finally, they reached the area Jake had given him. But instead of pulling up to a well-kept neighborhood, they were entering an older rundown part of town. The buildings here seemed less cared for, with cracked sidewalks and graffiti tagging the sides of most of the buildings. The streetlights flickered dimly, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood Marcus had expected. "Is this your place?" Marcus asked, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. Jake didn't respond immediately. He just stared ahead at the old apartment complex in the distance, the faded letters of the building's name barely visible under the dim streetlights. "Yeah," Jake muttered, still not looking at Marcus. "It's just up there." Marcus didn't press further, but as he drove through the shadowy streets, a feeling of foreboding settled over him. He could feel that something wasn't right, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was. The atmosphere inside the car had shifted entirely, and he could sense that Jake was hiding something important. Before he knew it, they reached the apartment complex, and Jake's hand was already on the door handle. He looked over at Marcus one last time, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he said softly, his voice quieter than before. "Really?" Marcus gave him a nod. "No problem, you take care of yourself, all right?" Jake didn't respond. He just opened the door and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the darkness of the night. As Marcus drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something that didn't make sense. The eerie atmosphere, the boy's strange behavior, and the unsettling vibe of the neighborhood all combined to leave him with a sense of dread. It was a feeling he couldn't explain, but one he knew he wouldn't soon forget. The drive to Jake's house felt longer than it should have. Marcus had been in this neighborhood countless times before, but tonight everything seemed different. The familiar streets he had traveled 100 times before now felt like foreign territory. The shadows seemed deeper, the night colder, and the houses, most of which looked abandoned, loomed like silent watchers. Jake hadn't spoken much during the last stretch of the drive, his silence heavy and thick like a weight in the car that neither of them could lift. He had been staring out of the window with an expression Marcus couldn't read. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, and his legs were pressed against the seat, almost as if he were trying to shrink into the corner of the car. Marcus stole a glance at Jake, trying to gauge his mood, but the teenager's face was unreadable. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a flicker of uncertainty in Jake's eyes, but it vanished too quickly for him to be sure. It was odd, though. Normally, a kid would at least be relieved when they got close to home, but Jake didn't seem like he was looking forward to getting out of the car at all. They turned onto a narrow, dimly lit street where the houses were tightly packed together, each one showing signs of neglect. Some had peeling paint, others had broken windows, and a few looked like they were barely standing. The streetlights cast a sickly glow, flickering in and out, and the entire area felt abandoned, as if it were on the outskirts of the city. Forgotten by everyone but the people who had nowhere else to go. "Is this it?" Marcus asked, pulling up to the curb in front of a small house that looked more like a rundown shack than a home. The roof was sagging and the yard was overgrown with weeds. The mailbox was rusted, hanging at an odd angle, and the front steps were cracked with the door barely hanging on its hinges. Jake didn't answer immediately. He looked at the house for a long moment, almost as if he were trying to decide whether or not to get out. Marcus could see the boy's hesitation, the way he chewed on his bottom lip, clearly reluctant to leave the safety of the car. "You sure this is where you want to be?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but concerned. He didn't want to push, but he couldn't help but wonder if this was the best place for a kid like Jake to be. Everything about this neighborhood screamed danger, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the teenager didn't belong here. Jake finally turned to face Marcus, his eyes momentarily locking with his before quickly looking away. "Yeah, this is it," he muttered. There was a bitterness in his voice, a kind of resigned acceptance as if he were used to being here, but hated every minute of it. Marcus nodded, but he didn't feel good about leaving Jake in such a place. He thought about offering to wait until the boy went inside just to make sure he was safe. But the last thing Jake seemed like he wanted was more pity. Still, Marcus couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right. The car came to a stop, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel, his fingers tightening as he debated what to do. He wanted to offer Jake more than just a ride home. He wanted to ask the teenager what had happened to him, why he seemed so out of place in his own skin. But Jake had already withdrawn, his shoulders slumped as he stared at the house, waiting for the inevitable. "Well," Marcus said, trying to sound casual as he turned off the engine, "I guess this is your stop." Jake gave a small nod, but didn't make any move to open the door. He seemed lost in thought, staring out the window as though he were searching for something or someone inside the darkness of the house. Thanks, Jake," finally said his voice quiet and distant. It was the first time he had spoken with any real emotion since they had met, and Marcus could hear the weight in his voice. "No problem," Marcus replied, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Take care of yourself, all right? You don't have to." Jake cut him off abruptly, the words barely above a whisper. "I know I'll be fine." And with that, he opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. He didn't look back as he made his way up the cracked steps to the house, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to convince himself that this was where he belonged. Marcus watched Jake until he reached the front door, then drove off slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror one last time. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something he wasn't meant to see, a glimpse into a world that wasn't supposed to be his business. But the more he thought about it, the more he couldn't ignore the nagging sense that Jake's story didn't end with just a simple ride home. There was something bigger at play here, something deeper than Marcus could have ever expected. As Marcus made his way back through the streets, his mind kept drifting back to the boy. He hadn't seen much of Jake's life, but the short ride had been enough to leave him with a sense of unease. The house was only part of it. The real question was, what had led Jake to this point? What kind of life had he been living before tonight? And more importantly, what had he left behind when he stepped out of Marcus's car? Marcus couldn't answer those questions, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't be able to forget Jake anytime soon. The morning sunlight streamed through Marcus's bedroom window, but it felt colder than usual. The sky, usually a clear and welcoming blue, was now clouded with an unnerving gray. It was as if the day itself had sensed that something was wrong. Marcus had woken up early, his usual routine of a strong cup of coffee, and the quiet hum of the city's morning rush now replaced by an unusual tension that had settled deep in his chest since the night before. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about Jake since he'd dropped the teenager off at his rundown house. Something didn't sit right, and it gnawed at Marcus with a persistence that wouldn't let up. He replayed the scene in his head over and over, the awkward silence, the strange feeling of unease that hung between them, and that haunting look in Jake's eyes as he stepped out of the car. But he shook it off, telling himself that maybe he was just overthinking it. Maybe Jake was just another troubled teenager lost in a world he didn't understand. But still that feeling lingered. It wasn't just the house or the boy's demeanor. It was something in his gut telling him that there was more to Jake's story than met the eye. Marcus had just finished breakfast when there was a sharp knock at the door. It wasn't the usual knock of a neighbor, nor the friendly tap of someone he knew. This was different, urgent, firm, and precise. He stood up, a cold shiver running down his spine as he made his way toward the door. There was no one he could think of who'd be knocking at his door at this hour. Maybe it was a delivery or even a mistake, but something told him that this wouldn't be a normal visit. As he opened the door, he was immediately faced with two men dressed in dark suits, their expressions serious, almost unreadable. "Mr. Marcus West." One of the men asked, his voice authoritative but not unkind. "We need to speak with you about a recent interaction you had with a young man named Jake Rivers." Marcus blinked, taken aback. The mention of Jake's name sent a jolt through his system. He wasn't prepared for this. "Jake Rivers!" Marcus repeated, his voice tinged with confusion. I helped him get home last night. He seemed to be in some trouble. What's going on?" The man nodded, glancing over at his partner. "That's why we're here, sir. We need to ask you a few questions. May we come in?" Marcus hesitated. His mind raced trying to piece together what could have brought these two men to his door. His first instinct was to close the door to shut it out and pretend like it was all just some misunderstanding. But something told him that doing so would only make things worse. He stepped back, opening the door wider to let them in. The two men entered his small apartment, their presence filling the room with a heaviness that Marcus couldn't quite shake. He could feel the tension hanging in the air, thick and oppressive. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice low as he gestured toward the couch. "What's going on? What does Jake have to do with any of this?" The man who had spoken earlier, presumably the lead agent, took a seat on the couch, his partner standing behind him, scanning the room with sharp, practiced eyes. "Jake Rivers is not who he appears to be." The agent said his words, deliberate, carefully chosen. "We've been tracking his movements for some time now. He's connected to a larger operation, one that we've been investigating for months." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of operation? What are you talking about?" The agent exchanged a brief glance with his partner, then continued. "Jake is not just a teenager from a rough neighborhood. He's the son of a high-level operative involved in a covert government project. His father, a man named Robert Rivers, has been a part of some very sensitive work, and it seems Jake has been swept up in something much bigger than he realizes." Marcus felt his stomach twist. He had suspected there was more to Jake than he had let on, but this was far beyond anything he could have imagined. A covert government operation, the son of a high-level operative. It all sounded like something out of a spy movie, not something that would intersect with his ordinary life. "You're telling me Jake is connected to some kind of secret government project?" Marcus asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "Exactly," the agent confirmed. "And what's worse, we believe Jake may be in danger. His involvement, whether he's aware of it or not, has drawn attention from people who will stop at nothing to get to him. That's where you come in." Marcus's confusion deepened. "Me? What do you mean I just gave the kid a ride home?" The agent leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're a civilian, Mr. West, but you were the last person to see Jake before he returned home. We need to know everything you can tell us about him. Every detail, his behavior, his words, anything that stood out to you during your time with him." "What do you decide? Marcus swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about it that way. He had simply helped a kid in need. But now with the FBI at his doorstep, the weight of the situation was becoming all too real. "I don't know what else I can tell you," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "He was just a teenager. He seemed quiet, distant. There was something odd about him, but nothing that stood out as dangerous. He didn't say much on the drive, and when we got to his house, he just left. That's it." The agent nodded, though it didn't seem like he believed Marcus entirely. "We're going to need you to think back carefully. If there's anything you remember, no matter how small, it could be important." Marcus felt his mind racing, trying to recall every moment of that brief ride. He remembered Jake's nervousness, the way he had stared out the window, the odd atmosphere between them, but nothing that stood out as particularly significant, just a kid trying to get home. As the agents pressed him for more details, Marcus realized the depth of the situation. His simple act of kindness, helping a teenager get home after midnight, had somehow landed him in the middle of something far bigger than he ever could have imagined. And now the FBI was asking him to dig into his memories and reveal every little thing he knew about Jake, a kid he had known for only a few hours. He glanced at the agents, their expressions unwavering. This wasn't just about a ride home anymore. It was about something far more dangerous, and Marcus was now caught in the middle of it. The air felt heavy in Marcus's small apartment, thick with the unspoken tension, as the FBI agents continued their questioning. Despite the quiet hum of the world outside, the room remained eerily still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to snap. Marcus had never been in a situation like this. He was used to his routine long shifts at the mall's security desk, simple conversations with the occasional visitor, but this was a nightmare he could never have imagined. The agent who had been leading the interrogation, Agent Reynolds, sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of his mouth. His eyes never left Marcus, sharp and calculating. The partner, Agent Harris, stood in the corner, still scanning the room, with that unnerving look in his eyes. They weren't here for small talk. They weren't here for any ordinary investigation. This was serious. Marcus, Agent Reynolds began, his tone low, but filled with an undeniable authority. "We need you to understand the gravity of this situation. the teen you helped last night. Jake Rivers is not who he claims to be. Marcus furrowed his brow, still trying to process everything. I don't get it. He's just a kid. What's so special about him? I'm just a security guard. I helped him get home. That's it. Agent Reynolds exhales slowly, the weight of the words he was about to say, pressing down on him. Jake Rivers was not born as Jake Rivers. He said, his voice steady, though the words held an unsettling edge. His real name is Lucas Hale. Marcus's mind raced. The name Lucas Hale hit him like a bolt of lightning, though he couldn't place it at first. Lucas Hale. What does that even mean? Who is he? Lucas Hale. Agent Reynolds repeated, letting the name hang in the air, was once a part of an extremely covert program. The kind of program most people can't even imagine. He was raised by people who wanted him to be, something he wasn't trained in, ways no child should ever be. He was groomed to be a tool for a much larger operation, one that has ties to some of the most powerful people in the world. Marcus shook his head, the weight of the situation still too much to fully comprehend. Wait, hold on. Are you saying this kid is some kind of spy or something? Agent Reynolds hesitated for a moment, then nodded. In a sense, yes, Lucas Hale. Jake Rivers was part of an underground program designed to develop highly skilled operatives. He was trained for a purpose you wouldn't believe, but when he turned 18, something happened. He escaped, he disappeared. The people who trained him, they've been looking for him ever since. Marcus felt the room spin. Everything that had seemed so normal, so innocuous just a few hours ago, was now shattered. He had thought he was helping a teenager who had just had a rough night, but now he realized he had been helping someone with a past that could bring everything crashing down. This is insane, Marcus muttered, trying to grasp the magnitude of what he was being told. So, you're telling me, this kid, this Jake Rivers, wasn't just a random teenager in need of a ride. He's been trained to be some kind of secret operative. For what? Agent Reynolds' expression darkened. For operations that you would never want to be involved in. Operations that involve high-level espionage, intelligence gathering, and actions that affect national security. The kind of work that puts lives at risk on a daily basis. Marcus stood there frozen. He felt a pit in his stomach, his heart hammering in his chest. You're saying this kid was part of all that, and I helped him. Just like that. Agent Reynolds nodded, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Yes, and now, because you've had contact with him, because you've helped him, you're part of the puzzle. Whether you realize it or not, you've become involved in something far bigger than you. We don't know how much he remembers how much he's been told, but what we do know is that he's been trying to escape this life for a long time. And now, his past is coming back for him. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jake wasn't just some kid who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been a part of something dangerous, something Marcus couldn't even begin to fathom, and now he had unknowingly become a part of that world too. But what do you want from me? Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. I just gave him a ride home. I didn't know any of this. Agent Reynolds' gaze softened, though the seriousness of his mission remained unchanged. We're not accusing you of anything, Marcus, but we need you to understand the situation. The people looking for Jake are dangerous. They won't hesitate to use anyone in their path to get what they want. And right now, you're connected to him. You need to be aware of the risks. Marcus felt his head spinning. The thought of being caught up in something so vast, so dangerous, was overwhelming. He was just a security guard. What could he possibly have to do with any of this? Is he safe? Marcus finally asked, his voice quiet. That's what we're trying to figure out, Agent Reynolds replied, his face grim. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. Marcus, we need to know everything about your interaction with him. Every detail. As Marcus listened to the agents continue their briefing, it became clear that nothing about his life would ever be the same again. What had started as a simple kind gesture, helping a kid in need, had spiraled into something much darker, much more dangerous. And now, with the revelation of Jake's true identity as Lucas Hale, Marcus found himself swept up in a world that was not only beyond his comprehension, but one that could have a devastating impact on his own life. The question now was, what would he do with this knowledge? How would he protect himself and Jake from the forces that were closing in? The morning after the FBI's interrogation, Marcus sat in the small break room of the mall, staring blankly at the cracked cup of coffee in front of him. The usual bustle of the morning shift, shuffling feet, Customers chattering, the hum of security systems felt distant, like he was no longer part of that world. His mind was still racing with the events of the previous night, replaying the ride with Jake, the strange atmosphere that had surrounded the teen, the tense moments when Marcus had dropped him off at his home. And then the bombshell. Jake wasn't Jake. He wasn't just a troubled teenager who'd gotten lost in the city. No, he was Lucas Hale, a name Marcus would never forget. Lucas Hale, a child soldier trained for covert operations, a part of a secret program run by shadowy figures who wanted nothing more than to create the perfect operative's puppets for a larger, sinister agenda. That's who he'd been helping. And now, Marcus's life had been irrevocably altered. As he sat in the break room, the fluorescent lights above flickering in the cold silence, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia, a byproduct of the FBI's visit, or just the weight of what he knew, but every person that passed by seemed to be a threat. Even his fellow security officers who usually greeted him with a simple nod now seemed like potential risks. What if someone was watching him too? What if the wrong person knew about his involvement with Lucas Hale? The sound of the break room door creaking open snapped him from his thoughts. It was his supervisor Carl who stepped in, a half-hearted smile on his face. "Hey Marcus, you good? You've been kind of off today." Marcus managed a weak smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired. Had a weird night. You know those long shifts." He tried to sound casual, but he knew Carl could tell something was off. Marcus had always been the type to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Carl raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "All right, if you say so. Just don't forget your shift's up soon. You take care of yourself." "All right." Marcus nodded absently, watching Carl leave before the silence crept back in. He picked up his coffee, his fingers wrapping around the warmth of the mug. The FBI agents hadn't been clear on everything. They wanted him to be a witness, a potential ally to track down Lucas. But they also made it clear that the situation wasn't as simple as just helping a teenager home. No, Marcus was now a part of something much bigger. A shadowy world of espionage, classified operations, and dark secrets. The people who had raised Lucas weren't just looking for him. They were looking for anyone who might have helped him. Anyone who knew too much. And right now, that made Marcus a target. The choice was clear. Marcus could stay silent, pretend like nothing happened, and go back to his quiet, predictable life. He could distance himself from it all, forget about the FBI, forget about Lucas Hale, and try to bury the events of that night. But that was not who Marcus was. He'd always prided himself on doing the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. The thought of walking away, of ignoring everything he knew, felt wrong. It gnawed at him. He had witnessed something that no one should ever see, a life that had been manipulated, controlled, and turned into a weapon. He couldn't just pretend it didn't matter. Lucas's escape was just the beginning, and Marcus knew that there were consequences to it all. If Lucas was to truly be free, someone had to help him navigate this dangerous world. Someone had to fight for him, someone who wasn't bound by the secrecy and lies that had shaped his life. But doing the right thing came with a price. The FBI had made it clear that if Marcus got involved, if he continued to be a part of this story, he would be in their sights. They would watch him track his every move and use him however they could. And the people who were after Lucas, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who stood in their way. Marcus felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had a choice to make, but no matter what he chose, there was no going back. The quiet buzz of his phone vibrating on the table interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. "We know you helped him, and we're coming for you next." The words sent a chill through his spine. He hadn't thought it would happen so quickly, but now it was clear the people who had been hunting Lucas were already aware of his involvement. The FBI's warning was no longer just an abstract threat. It was real. It was happening. Marcus stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked to the window, looking out over the bustling street below. He was just a security guard. He had never imagined his life could spiral into something like this. But he had made a choice the moment he decided to help Lucas. And now he had to see it through. The choice wasn't easy, but Marcus knew what he had to do. He couldn't turn his back on someone who was running from a past. They didn't choose. He couldn't let fear control him. With a deep breath, Marcus typed a reply to the message on his phone. "I won't back down. I'm doing what's right." The weight of his words hung in the air as he hit send. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing. This was just the beginning, and no matter what happened, he was in this for the long haul.